My name is Elena Perez. I go by Len. I am from Picaris Pueblo, a small tribe nestled at the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northern New Mexico. I'm here today to share some of myself with you, but I can't be with you in person today. Instead, I'm celebrating my birthday with friends and family in my hometown of Santa Fe. When Rev Dance asked me if I would like to contribute to today's service, I was hesitant, but I came to the conclusion that I'm a UU, I am Indigenous, and what I tell you matters. At least I hope it matters to you. And this reflection very quickly turned into a pretty serious essay, so let's get going. I'm here to tell you, my friends, that I'm angry, though I may not look it. I'm angry because our voices, our stories, and our struggles are often overlooked and dismissed. But despite my anger, I'm here to speak on some of the challenges facing Indigenous communities today and how liberation theology calls us to be active participants in dismantling the systems that perpetuate these challenges. So let's start by talking about liberation theology and how it relates to Southwest Native American spirituality, especially in the context of Unitarian Universalism. When we weave in Southwest Native American spirituality, something beautiful happens. This spiritual tradition is deeply rooted in a reverence for nature and a recognition of how everything is interconnected. Native American spirituality embraces a holistic understanding of existence and sees the sacred in every aspect of life. It's about communal well-being and a responsibility to care for one another and the earth. And it aligns perfectly with the principles of liberation theology. By embracing these perspectives, we can deepen our understanding of justice work and find inspiration for transformative action. We're talking about actively challenging systems of oppression, supporting Indigenous communities, and working to dismantle the colonial legacies that continue to haunt us. It's about recognizing the wisdom and traditions of Indigenous spirituality and standing in solidarity with marginalized voices. Let's not sugarcoat this part. The Indigenous peoples of the U.S. have endured a complex and challenging history. We have faced forced displacement, cultural erasure, and ongoing socioeconomic disparities. The history of Indigenous peoples in this country is stained with profound injustices. Centuries of colonization, forced assimilation, and deliberate destruction of our cultural practices have left lasting scars, and those scars are still felt today. Our communities suffer from high poverty rates, limited access to quality education, inadequate healthcare services, and crumbling infrastructure. Economic opportunities are scarce, leading to unemployment and income inequality. These systemic barriers only worsen the challenges we face, perpetuating cycles of disadvantage. And let's not forget the struggle for land and resource rights. Our traditional lands, vital for cultural preservation and sustenance, have been encroached upon and exploited. Extractive industries such as mining and fossil disregard the sacredness and environmental integrity of our territories. They disrupt the delicate balance between Indigenous peoples and our ancestral lands, undermining our autonomy and self-determination. Our cultures are under attack. The loss of language, traditional knowledge, and cultural practices continue to erode the rich tapestry of our heritage. Efforts to reclaim and revitalize Indigenous languages, arts, ceremonies, and storytelling are met with significant challenges. We face limited resources, limited access to cultural education, and the impact of assimilationist policies that have disconnected many of us from our ancestral traditions. And if that's not enough, we are also on the front lines of climate change and environmental degradation. The impacts disproportionately affect us. Rising temperatures, water scarcity, and loss of biodiversity threaten our very existence. Our traditional subsistence practices are under threat, and the delicate balance between Indigenous peoples and our lands is being disrupted. Despite our deep ecological knowledge, our voices are often marginalized in environmental decision-making processes. The struggles we face are not isolated incidents. They are interconnected and deeply rooted in historical and ongoing injustices. It's time to address these challenges head on, and it's time to acknowledge and redress the past while empowering Indigenous communities to shape their own future. It's time to recognize our inherent rights, cultural distinctiveness, and contributions. It's time to pave the way for a more just and inclusive society, where our voices are heard, our rights respected, and our cultures celebrated. I invite you to reflect on your privilege, confront your complicity in oppressive systems, and commit to the ongoing work of justice and liberation. It's about fostering a more inclusive and transformative Unitarian Universalist faith that honors the interconnectedness of all beings. By embracing these insights, we can strive for a better world where everyone's liberation is intertwined. UUs can take meaningful action to combat the oppressions faced by Indigenous peoples. It starts by educating yourselves. Educate yourselves about our history, culture, and struggles. Seek out and center our voices and perspectives in your congregational activities. Build relationships and solidarity with our communities. Support Indigenous-led movements and campaigns. Advocate for policy changes that promote justice and equality. Reflect on your assumptions and challenge the biases you hold. Cultivate cultural competence within your congregation and community. That's our UUCP congregation and community. But remember, this isn't a one-time effort. The struggle for justice is ongoing, and allyship requires commitment and active engagement. Stand with us. Listen to us. Learn from us and act in solidarity. Talk to the guy at the bus stop. Google the American Indian Movement or the Indian Act. Shut up when indigenous people are talking. Buy native and buy from native-owned shops. And punch your friends who dress as Indians for Halloween. Every little bit helps. Together, we can contribute to dismantling the systems of oppression and promoting the empowerment of Indigenous peoples. And together, we can demand justice, respect, and equality. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you, Len. Thank you to one of our favorite water protectors. Happy birthday. Thank you for your words. Beloveds, this year we have journeyed through several of the world religions that we as humans have created to make meaning in our world. We've looked at the concept of liberation and where we draw inspiration and hope from each of these different religions. We've explored faiths as diverse as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, humanism, Buddhism, and the uniquely American culture of the African American Church. I have appreciated the conversations that have emerged from this series about what these traditions have in common and how much they differ. I have delighted in hearing you talk more and more about liberation in more complex understanding terms and engaging with the nuances that come with exploring these huge topics with appreciative eyes and open hearts. So we conclude this series this year with the religion that is most geographically relevant to us here in Phoenix, and also the most difficult to fit into this liberation box: American Native and Indigenous religions. As with the other religions, which are not my religions, we turn to guides from these religions to help us understand the complexities. For today's exploration, I have the great honor of drawing from the wisdom of one of my professors from seminary, Dr. George E. Tinker, who is professionally known as Tink Tinker. He is a citizen of the Osage Nation and was the professor of American Indian cultures and religious traditions at Iliff School of Theology. He has written extensively, and his most relevant book is Spirit and Resistance: Political Theology and American Indian Liberation. I have drawn all year from this book, edited from Miguel de la Torre, Hope of Liberation in World Religions. I highly recommend it. So this is why it's difficult to fit indigenous religions into the liberation theology box, although I think Len just did an amazingly acute job of it. But it is a challenge because, like much else, that box is inherently based on colonized Christianity. First of all, we need to remember that many American Indians refer to October 11th, 1492 as the last day of perfect freedom on this continent. The indigenous concept of freedom, which is synonymous for them with harmony and balance, has been a struggle to get anywhere close to that since that colonization. It gets even more complicated because, as Tinker says, Native American religious traditions have been misunderstood, maligned, romanticized, and misappropriated. Paradoxically, these traditions have been either disparaged and condemned as primitive, savage, bizarre, and/or evil, or they've been fetishized and romanticized as an exotic colonial fantasy, end quote. And then it gets even more complicated, as he says, liberation is a modern concept that was foreign to North American communities in that it necessarily connotes its opposite, which is bondage, even as it idealizes escape from or resistance to that bondage. To the contrary, North American indigenous communities had no tradition of conquest or bondage per se until the advent of European invasion and colonial occupation. Therefore, the concept of liberation itself comes out of the colonizer's culture and religious tradition. Tinker puts a fine point on it. To ask the oppressed now to use that tool seems blatantly disingenuous. Christianity was imposed on us by the colonizer through the colonizer's religious functionaries as a distinct strategy for conquest. The imposition of Christianity was always essentially just another strategy to pry the land loose from its indigenous owners, to satisfy the greed of trading companies or immigrant hordes of settlers. So, how does Tinker reconcile with this? While basically saying that liberation theology for Indian people, and he does use that term to Katie's point, may require a firm no to Jesus and Christianity. To Tinker, the starting place is not grounded in Christianity, but rather the ceremonial structures that promoted peace, harmony, and balance for millennia before the European invasion. As I said earlier, freedom in indigenous religions is synonymous with balance and harmony, not just in harmony with other humans, but with all of the creatures of the earth and the land and the water, all that we mentioned in the meditation. I wanted you to experience that versus just talking about it. Because another way that indigenous balance and harmony differs from its counterpoints from the colonizing Christians is that it doesn't center the freedom of the individual. Rather, peace and harmony are a communal goal. Tinker says any disruption of the community's balance, and there was always some disruption or another, called for attention to whatever ceremony needed to be done in order to restore balance. Since balance was an ideal that called for maintaining appropriate relationships with animals, with plants, with rivers and mountains, and with each other, the radical individualism of American European peoples could never be part of our ancestors' experience of the world or their own habitual patterns of behavior. We need to decolonize that, huh? Decisions weren't grounded in what was right for the individual, but instead made with the well-being of the community in mind. One example of the more common community building ceremonies is the giveaway, a ceremony that is practiced in nearly all communities today. Tinker describes it this way: in this ceremony, a person, or especially that person's family, shows its honoring of the community by collecting especially desirable goods and then giving them away to others in a formal ceremonial setting. Indeed, one dramatic difference between American European society and traditional Indian societies is that Indian people do not place the highest value on those who have given the most, who have the most of this world's material wealth. Rather, our societies place the highest value on who gives the most away. Tinker continues, the practice of generosity was so important historically in my own Osage nation that one could not rise to leadership on the Council of Elders unless one's life had been marked by a habit of personal and familial giveaway. In the Osage tradition, the giveaway was intense. It meant collecting goods for up to 7 years and then giving away everything that the family possessed. This act of community building for its next meal, this act of community building meant that the family in turn became dependent on the community for its next meal and for its own well-being until they could reestablish self-sufficiency. What a powerful mechanism for establishing a communitarian value system and for ensuring communal harmony. So to be clear, if we are not Indigenous, this religion is not ours, but yet we can learn some of the powerful lessons it has to teach. We can remember that the community is more important than the individual. We can reject the worship of mass consumption that comes from corporate greed, as well as the value of radical individualism to put the collective ahead of the individual. We can remember that this collective means all things, not just the humans, but the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the flying beings, the rocks, the mountains, the rivers. We can fight for the sacredness of the water as if it were our family, because it is. We can look to see how we are out of balance, because we are most often out of balance. And then we can remember the power of ceremony to bring us back into balance. We can recognize the power of ritual in regrounding us in what is important to our community and our world. And we can remember that liberation means different things to different people. And that for people who haven't been free for over 500 years, that we look past our Eurocentric colonizing lens to see what existed before the sins of colonization took place. We must put aside the assumption that we know what other people's reality is and be open to listening and learning different perspectives. Peace be upon you and all your relations. May you find harmony and balance in all that you do. May your gift-giving be abundant as your community thrives. And may your work for the liberation of all people continue in this sacred space that we have created together. So might it be.